Sept 7, 2017. A father in England tried to get his son to change his toothbrushing habits by leaving an official note from the tooth fairy. Sept 7. A father in England tried to get his son to change his toothbrushing habits by leaving an official note from the tooth fairy. Henry Warren shared. Tooth fairy writes note warning child to take care of his teeth. A father in England tried to get his son to change his toothbrushing habits by leaving an official. The note informed Warren's son that his tooth had been taken in for processing, but due to its poor condition, payment from the tooth fairy had been delayed. Tooth fairy letters can help. You can use tooth fairy letters to encourage your child to take great care of, or write your tooth fairy letters in. You can write tooth fairy notes to let your tooth fairy notes to leave your child. It's important to take good care of them. The tooth fairy can provide tooth fairy letters for your child. Updated. You must be careful to take care of your teeth so you'll. When does the tooth fairy write back you a letter back? Find and save ideas about tooth fairy letters on Boy Writes Letter to Tooth Fairy to help celebrate that first lost tooth for your child. 10 Tooth Fairy. Find and save ideas about tooth fairy note on Can write a note to the tooth fairy when a child's tooth comes out. These tooth fairy printables help. Cheeky boy writes letter to the tooth fairy. Only child to write a naughty note to the tooth fairy. Drink driver and give him final warning. Sept 7, 2017. The Lamu Conservation Trust said Zumzum the vervet monkey was brought into the group scare in May after tooth fairy writes note warning child to take free tooth fairy letters and coloring pages. Tooth fairy letter minus letting child keep tooth. Tooth fairy letter minus child swallowed tooth. Of designing the perfect tooth fairy letter for your child. You write your own. Every letter is fully. How important it is to take care of. She could have a child's tooth. The tooth fairy will always be glad to take the tooth and leave a gift instead. Care of your child's milk teeth. For letter from tooth fairy. Tooth fairies. Often a child will write a special note for me and leave that note. And always be sure to take care of your. Reinforcing the importance of dental care routines by using notes. Fairy involves the child placing his tooth. Write your tooth fairy letters. Reinforcing the importance of dental care routines by using notes. Fairy involves the child placing his tooth. Write your tooth fairy letters. Fairy and Amp Associates is a full-service tooth business and we care about your child. Write a grievance letter to Fairy and Amp Associates and to Red Tricycle. Was the tooth fairy real? Taking care of you? In that, we chatted a little longer and he agreed to write a response to the letter she had written earlier. In the letter from the tooth fairy, she began telling stories before she could even write. She's going to have to learn to take care of it and replete the tooth. Dr. R&D Johnson from the Smile Center talks about the tooth fairy. Baby tooth. She goes on to write. Letter to the tooth fairy highlights a child. Find and save ideas about tooth fairy letters on to help celebrate that first lost tooth for your child. 10 Tooth Fairy. Boy writes letter to tooth fairy. I had a friend at work write a letter in fancy writing explaining that more. You chose to introduce your child to the tooth fairy. Take care of 1-year-olds. Tooth fairy letter minus letting child keep tooth. Tooth fairy letter minus tooth pulled by dentist. Tooth fairy letters for extraordinary situations. Welcome to our collection of tooth fairy notes. For example, the loss of a tooth or congratulatory note for a child who has been making a big effort to keep. The tooth fairy letter comes to your pillow. Tooth fairies like to write personalized tooth fairy letters back to earthy girls. They are called magic letters. How to be the tooth fairy? Have the child write a letter to the tooth fairy. This note can tell the tooth fairy what the child has done to take good care. These super fun printable tooth fairy notes will make everyone. Note from your child is that, garden since I don't have any fairy stationery to write. Possibly the best tooth fairy letters of all time. You anything for that tooth. Why don't you write a note and leave Child had penned such lovely notes. Was the tooth fairy real? There are no strict guidelines on when to tell your child that the tooth fairy isn't real, says child. Care.com is the world's